Hello and welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
My name is Matt.
We are on our third episode of our space series. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at what space travel looks like. So we've got a couple of films to help us out with this. So one of the films we'll be looking at in this episode is Destination Moon from 1950. And what's the other one we're looking at today then, Matt?
Mega blockbuster 1995 Apollo 13.
So yeah, they're a good little combo.
Yep.
Yeah, I watched them back to back, so I felt like they went quite nicely as a little double bill.
Nice. So you really know how to get to the moon now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, watching these two films will teach you exactly all the skills you need to get up there. It teaches the theory, at least.
Yeah, in great detail, and we'll get into that.
Yeah.
It is just 1 minute before takeoff time in the uninhabited desert of White Sands, New Mexico.
Tell them to stand by for count-off and firing.
59, 58, 57, but 56.
To reach this dramatic moment were months of construction, checking every detail 1,000 times, and a desperate struggle to convince the skeptical, to outwit those who would stop us, to muster up courage to challenge the black, airless void of terror-stricken space. The picture you've been reading about in every important national magazine and newspaper. Among them, Life. This week, the New York Times, Popular Science, Seeing Stars, Popular Mechanics, Parade, the New York Daily News.
Yeah, let's start with Destination Moon then. Who directed this one?
So this was directed by Irving Pichel.
It's directed by him and someone else, isn't it? Dick
So
Lundy?
Dick Lundy, but Dick Lundy isn't credited though.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, I don't believe he's credited. I didn't see his name come up in the credits, so that's what I'm going by.
Oh, yeah. Is that some studio meddling?
Probably. So first off, what did you think of this film? So this film was made in 1950, so It was the start of the 50s sci-fi sort of film era, really.
Yeah, well, it's a good starting point for that type of film, isn't it? Had you ever heard of this film before?
No, it was only when I was doing the research for the series that I came across it.
Yeah,
but it's quite well known though.
Is it?
Yeah, because it's largely considered like the big one of the 50s to kick things off.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good film. I was trying to think like where would you see this film in this day and age, because it's slightly outdated, it's slightly older, but it's not as kitschy as some films from about 1950. The sort of film that might get happily replayed as the first film on Film 4. I don't know if it's got enough of the kind of like craziness to like really be a lot of fun for a modern audience.
Yeah, because the build up to this film, there was one of the main things which was out at the time was the Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon series.
Right.
And that was kind of like the big sci-fi series of the time. So that was kind of like all the audiences really knew of science fiction at that point. So here comes Destination Moon, and it's a bit more rooted in reality, as opposed to the sort of like fantasy elements that Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon sort of put forward.
Yeah, I wonder if it would have seemed a bit dry then, some audience members.
Yeah, I think it's a mix, because it must have been quite fantastical, the idea of going to the moon at this point, because so we're in 1950, so
war ended in 1945. So not that fantastical, because we were talking about the rocket scientists who worked on Frau Mond, weren't we?
Yeah.
They went on to do a lot of rocket research during the war. We had the Germans built the V2 rockets, and the V2s were a bit of a predecessor to real space travel, weren't they?
Yeah.
Like the scientists that worked on them then defected to the West, like they were either working on atomic bombs or rockets in that day. And then they went on to be the leading minds of the space program.
Yeah, because this was sort of like the lead in to the big sort of space hype and the space race.
Yeah.
This film seems to be sort of like the definite lead into that.
Yeah.
And it had a lot of publicity around it upon its release. So there was lots of articles in like Life magazine, Time, I think. There was a big sort of press run leading up to the release of Destination Moon.
Yeah, they shot themselves in the foot with that a little bit, though, didn't they? Because someone bit them to the post.
Yeah, this other cheeky group of filmmakers from Lippert Pictures, they heard about Destination Moon, saw the big hype about it, saw that there was going to be this big sort of film about space travel. So they beat them to the post. They made a film called Rocket Ship XM.
Yeah.
Which is also known as Expedition Moon.
Yeah.
Another Moon title. Fantastic.
Except they end up going to Mars in that film. They get lost.
Again, that's more sort of like the fantasy elements in that as well, because from what I read about it, they go to Mars, and then there's the remnants of a race which have undergone a nuclear war. So they're all sort of like disfigured and radioactive aliens on Mars.
Sounds pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
Sounds like a Doctor Who episode.
Yeah, but it's like it's cheaper than this one.
Yeah. It's the first mockbuster.
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly an early one.
Yeah, so it was released 25 days before the feature, I think. Oof. So yeah, they literally just beat them to it. And of course people would go to see this film thinking it's Destination Moon probably, or it's the big space film which is due to come out. Very annoying for all of the press department for Destination Moon, I would imagine.
Yeah. I would be livid if I was working on that. So yeah, it kind of signals the start of the space race, doesn't it? What I was a bit surprised by was this was such a long time before like the biggest milestones of the space race. It's 7 years before even Sputnik was launched. That was the first. I don't know the actual category, but it was a Russian satellite, and I think it was the first man-made object to go into orbit or something like that. But certainly an enormous milestone in the space race. That was 7 years after this one, and then so nearly 20 years before Armstrong and Aldrin on the moon.
Yeah, Apollo 11.
Yeah. But it's still so specific about, the nature of the launch and how they're going to land on the moon and why it's okay to then come back from the moon and all of that. It was really, really detailed and specific.
Yeah, they go into a lot of detail about the about what would happen when you go to the moon, all the sort of technical stuff about getting there. And they do that in like a few different ways, don't they? But obviously you've got to think that they're trying to tell all this kind of stuff to an audience which have no idea about what it's like to go into space, really. They've only seen shows like Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, Frau in Mond, maybe. Shows and films where people go up and then they're just walking around and it's fine. There's an atmosphere and they're dressed up in their normal clothes. And then here comes this film where they've got things like the G-force, the pressure you feel as you go up into space. What do you need to do there? Talking about orbits and things like that. It's all kind of stuff which was touched upon in Frau in Mond.
Yeah.
But with this, it's a big American blockbuster release. So it's finally out in the larger sort of like scheme of things in the larger world. So it must have reached audiences all over with this big budget.
Yeah, you can really see the budget. I mean, the production value is very good for a 1950 film. But we need to talk about Woody Woodpecker showing up near the start of this film, don't we? So the basic plot of the film is a general and a scientist are desperately trying to get a moon launch program off the ground, but it runs into all sorts of trouble. There's an accident, which is weirdly portentous of Apollo 1 and what happened there.
But they say the accident in this was sabotage, don't they?
Yeah, there's a bit of an unresolved kind of sabotage plot.
Yeah, it's very sort of, it's just suggested.
Yeah.
Because obviously the political landscape at the time, it was supposed to be peacetime, but there was the Cold War coming around.
Yeah, the Cold War was really kicking up.
Yeah.
Kicking up speed. So they turn to industry. The general's got a friend who is just some sort of tycoon, isn't he? I didn't really get a sense of what his company was. They build big things.
He's just a leader of industry, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a captain of industry. So they turn to him and he's on board and they sell him the whole idea based on it's the only safe option, really. If we don't master the moon before the Russians, then we're done for. The first country that claims the moon is going to dominate the world or something like that.
Yeah, because they say whoever conquers the moon will conquer the world, because they'll be able to launch missiles from the moon, is what their sort of game plan is from the sounds of it.
Yeah, that's the threat.
Yeah, and then if they're launching them from the moon, there's no defense against it, because you can't tell where they're going to come from
Yeah.
or where they're going to go to.
So your tycoon guy, captain of industry, he's on board, but he's got to sell the idea to investors. And the way that he does this early in the film is he shows a room full of very stereotypical American businessmen, a cartoon of Woody Woodpecker.
Yeah. And this sort of like group of businessmen is like what we've seen previously with the scientists and the astronomers, and like A Trip to the Moon.
Yeah.
We've got this group of like wizard-looking scientists. And in Frau im Mond, we've got this group of scientists all arguing about stuff. But in this one, they've got a similar scene, but it's more like the businessman scene in Frau im Mond.
Yeah, I like that they're both sort of a representation of its society. They're like a stand-in for society. We've had kind of an elite scientific society with opinions on moon travel in the previous films. We had wizards. But now in 1950, we're after the Second World War in America, it's a very different kind of society that's rallying around space travel. It's businessmen, it's like oil tycoons. There's a guy from Texas who's like the Texas businessman from The Simpsons.
Yeah, he's exactly like that, isn't he?
Yeah, that's the guy they eventually get on board and to
He's
finance
like,
the whole
we're
thing.
going to have to do it in Texas because it's the only place that has space enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's nice because in Frau im Mond, you have this group of businessmen who are this evil corporation.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, the leaders of industry are seen as men who will help us get to space. There's still an evil agenda, really, because they want to try and get up there and claim it for America before anyone else.
Well, that's interesting that you say it's an evil agenda, because it's definitely not presented as an evil agenda. It's not presented as evil.
Yeah. But when you look at it, like, objectively.
Yeah. No, I agree, because they're saying that there's this threat that if they don't get to the moon before Russia, whoever gets to the moon first gets to launch missiles at Earth from the moon.
Brilliant. Yay. Come on, America.
That sentence is kind of unfinished. But the end of that sentence is, so it's bad if Russia can launch missiles at the Earth, but it's good if we can launch missiles at Russia from the moon. And I think there's no awareness of that. There's no self-awareness of that in this film, because it's right at the start of the Cold War. No one making this film had any interest in any kind of self-critique of America at this time. It would have been completely inappropriate.
Yeah. And from their standpoint, they're protecting people's liberties. They're protecting America.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of protecting their country, because obviously World War II's just happened.
Yeah.
So they can see how things can turn the other way so quickly. And then the result of that.
Yeah, it's very celebratory of American interventionism. I think 70 years of American foreign policy later, that idea that it's so great that the Americans should be the ones to be able to launch missiles from the moon first, it doesn't sound at all good. It does sound like an evil agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah. But who do they use to sell this package and sell this evil agenda?
So
to
let's
the
go
investors?
back to Woody Woodpecker then. So the guy who produced this as well was really good mates with this guy called Walter Lantz, who was the guy who created Woody Woodpecker in the first place. So Lantz had helped this guy, George Powell, to get his citizenship papers when he first came over to America. When Powell came to produce Destination Moon, he wanted to have some sort of cartoon character there to explain the space travel aspects, but they couldn't afford Disney, so he called in a favour from his mate Lance, and then that's why Woody Woodpecker ended up in the film. He also produced War of the Worlds.
All right.
And he also directed The Time Machine.
Oh, cool.
And he did this thing called The Puppetoons. So a lot of the special effects and stuff, I think he brought his expertise on board to try and do that, because there's lots of like model work and sort of puppets and stuff.
Oh,
in
there
this
are,
as
yeah.
well.
It's quite Ray Harryhausen-y.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get to that later.
Yes, I've got a few comments
that's
about
so
that.
weird though that the director of War of the Worlds and The Time Machine, the creator of Woody Woodpecker, it just doesn't mesh. Like those two worlds shouldn't cross.
It's
right?
really strange. So what's the lead up to his starring cameo then?
So they've made this Woody Woodpecker film to convince investors that it's a good idea that A Trip to the Moon is going to work. It really reminded me of the animated DNA from Jurassic
I
Park.
knew you were going to say that. Yeah, because it's exactly the same sort of thing, isn't it?
It's right at the start of the movie. It's within the plot of the film. It's there for the ignorant characters to understand a trip to the moon, but it's also completely there for our benefit. We're going to have Woody Woodpecker explain to the audience how it's possible to, launch a rocket to the moon.
Yeah, it's a really good plot device to get all the exposition across straight away.
Yeah, an instructional video.
Yeah, and I think they actually showed this video around schools and stuff as well.
NASA took it after the film was released, and it became a real NASA video, which is great.
Yeah, because it tells you everything that you need to know. And so how do they describe space travel in this? So Woody Woodpecker starts off saying, oh no, you can't go into space, it's ridiculous, there's no way you can get a ship up there, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. The main sort of premise they use is it's like that Bugs Bunny cartoon where Bugs is controlling Daffy, or it's a Daffy cartoon, but you find out Bugs is the animator. There's like an animator who's talking to Woody, gives him a shotgun, tells him to shoot it, and Woody goes flying backwards, and that becomes the basis of this is how rocket-powered propulsion works. Shoot the gun at the ground, Woody goes up in the air, do that loads of times, you'll reach the moon.
Which is exactly what Méliès was saying previously on a trip to the moon. He was like, you get a big gun and you fire them off into the moon.
Méliès was shooting the gun at the moon. He should have been shooting the gun at the ground.
Yeah, there's slightly a bit off there, only slightly.
But again, it goes to show that, we've had rockets in the war, but we haven't had space travel. But the basic logic of how we're going to get off the ground has been fairly consistent. And we've covered almost 50 years of cinema, and we're still talking about, well, it's a big gun and it launches stuff into the sky. That's how propulsion works.
Yeah.
The logic just builds and builds, but it's the same essential logic in all these films.
And they go a step further than that as well, don't they? They actually show you Woody in the rocket. It goes up, and then you see why they get rid of one of the other rockets, so they can get a bit more power to go further. And then once they get to the moon, they can just angle themselves with the gyros in order to land, because they'll just fall to the moon anyway, because it'll get pulled into the gravitational pull of the moon's orbit.
Yeah.
And I found that bit really interesting, because it's stuff that you wouldn't think of. And then the way they get back is they do basically fall off the moon and they fall straight back into the Earth's orbit.
The narrator tells Woody Woodpecker that it's easier to come back because it's downhill all the way. That makes sense. And it's a really good way of explaining it. It's just, the gravitational pull is less, so we don't need the big rocket that we had on Earth. We just need a slightly smaller rocket that we've landed, and that's going to propel us enough to get back to Earth.
Yeah, because there's no gravity. We'll just need to get off enough in order to get back there.
Yeah. And we'll get into some of the complexities of that in Apollo 13, but that is kind of the fundamentals of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got an enormous amount of energy to get there, and then you land, and then, I guess 1/6 of the energy is needed to get back.
Yeah, which is and I really enjoyed the fact it was put in layman's terms as well.
Sure.
Because Woody Woodpecker describing all of that to me made total sense.
Yeah.
And it made me understand what was coming in the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And I think it made me understand Apollo 13 a little bit more as well,
Good.
The moon is a great deal easier to reach than you realize.
Oh, sure, it's a cinch. Only 240,000 miles. Paved highway all the way and a gas station at every intersection.
Fuel is no problem, Woody. The engines do not have to blast all the time. Just long enough to get you away from the gravitational pull of the Earth, following which you fall wherever you're headed for.
What do you think of Woody Woodpecker?
He's a little bit annoying.
He's well annoying.
Yeah.
I never liked him. What stable of cartoon is he? Is he a Looney Tune?
I don't think he's a Looney Tune.
He's not Disney.
I don't know.
Is he just his own thing?
Because I know they did a reboot, didn't they?
Oh, God.
Like when I was younger, I remember they sort of started one of those.
I don't get what his deal is, and I don't like cartoon characters when I don't know what their deal is.
I was going to try and do his laugh then. It's like, really annoying.
That's great.
But great for telling you us a spouse.
But you know how, like, Bugs is mischievous and a bit of a jerk? Daffy's angry. What's Woody's deal? He's a woodpecker who laughs.
I mean, woodpeckers are a little bit annoying as well, aren't they? They're just sort of like in the trees making lots of noise. That's basically his personality.
So the cartoon's great. Cartoon's a great plot device, and investors are on board, and we go to the moon. But it's like a crazy rush job, isn't it?
Yeah.
The next kind of 20 minutes of the film are it's all about building the rocket, getting the guys trained up, and then there's a weird moment where they're going to get shut down by the government, aren't they?
Yeah, because there's no sort of legislation to allow this kind of thing, because it's unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever happened before.
Well, that's their justification for doing it in the first place. They've all got a bit of a asking for forgiveness is better than asking for permission kind of attitude to it all. We're going to launch a rocket, and then the government do kind of, or the city council or whatever, kind of get together and try and stop them. And then I think like the chief engineer guy looks at the calendar and he's like, next best day to launch is 17 hours from now.
Yeah, so they have to rush it through,
Yeah.
don't they? But also there's something in it for the businessman as well, because they reckon that
Moon gold?
Yeah, well, not moon gold this time. But if they can do this, the government are going to pay them back, basically. That's kind of what their reasoning is, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting political criticism, which is that they've all agreed that it's completely necessary, but we are in quote unquote peacetime, so the government won't fund it. But then it will become too late, at which point the government's going to leap on whatever business is, significantly ahead with research. They're going to get a massive government contract. It's very, this was written by Robert Heinlein,
Yeah, I knew about this vaguely.
who, he's like an insanely prolific sci-fi author from this period, based on a book of his, or based on a couple of books with similar plots written by him, and then he also worked on the screenplay. He's the guy who wrote Starship Troopers.
Oh, it's the same guy as that.
Yeah, I've not read the book of Starship Troopers. I love the film, but it's sort of widely reported that the book is pretty right-wing, pro-military, whereas the film is the complete opposite and a complete satire on that.
Yeah, because it's Verhoeven, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who gets hold of it and satirises it out.
Yeah, and it's just completely taking the piss out of the book, I think.
Yeah.
The book is quite a serious. It's great that space marines will go into space and have a pointless war with insects. That's what I understand. But
Yeah.
definitely coming through in this film, I think you're seeing a bit of that. It's very pro-American, but it's not totally positive of the American government. It's very positive of American industry. It's like capitalism is so great as an ideology that it's leading the way on all fronts. It's thank God for American industry taking us to the moon, and the government's going to come crawling back to us.
Yeah, it's interesting that they've got that as at the forefront of the film, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that's why, it's one of the reasons. I don't think this film would have ever had any American self-criticism, because it, like I said, it would be totally inappropriate for a film like this at this time. But I think Robert Heinlein is a good example of a guy who was very into the whole American post-war vibe, and probably didn't like the Russians very much.
And because of his involvement, is that how they got the guy who did all the artwork involved? Because the scene backdrops is done by a illustrator who's quite famous for doing science fiction sort of drawings and paintings and things like that.
I don't know enough about their careers. I don't know if Robert Heinlein would have had the sway to be like, get this artist on board, but I imagine they would have been working in the same circles, like the kind of magazines and periodicals that would publish Heinlein's work would probably also commission the artwork. But I don't know if they'd have a very close relationship.
Because who's the guy who did the lunar scenery? Is it Chesley Bonestell?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because he painted those big sort of like when they actually do get to the moon, there's lots of fantastic scenery, which it doesn't look as spectacular looking at from an eye in 2020. But
I thought it still looked good.
Yeah,
It was a
it
good
still looks
painting,
good. It's like, apparently they were like 13 feet long and mounted on wheels, all these scenery elements that they put in there. And the way they've got the stars and everything, they've got like luminous holes with lights and stuff and things like that. I don't know exactly how they did it, but it's interesting that they've got, I just thought there might be a connection between the illustrator and the guy who wrote it.
Not sure, but they are good representations of the kind of like American sci-fi artistic landscape at the time. You've got these just really big, very prolific names that are working away, and I wonder if this is one of the first examples of them coming together in Hollywood and, getting into the film business.
Yeah, and that transition from sort of books and art into actual film. So you've already got the visuals and the ideas out there in popular culture. It's just translating them into a film.
And mainstreaming that kind of culture.
Yeah.
When we do finally get to the kind of blast off, I found that the middle chunk of this film was like a series of really good set pieces, right? What were you thinking with these? 'Cause we got the blast off sequence itself, which is very similar to Pharaoh in Mond, with the pressure and the blast off and the countdown and all that. And that leads into the actual journey, and then they get to the moon. That whole sequence I really enjoyed. I did think it was quite similar to Pharaoh in Mond, though.
Yeah, it definitely was. I did enjoy the fact as well. It didn't beat around the bush with getting to that point. Yeah, I think it's like 40 minutes in. This is an hour and a half film.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it gets straight to the point. It's like, we're going to build this rocket. We're going to go up into space, blah, blah, blah. We're going to do it. And then they've got all the backstory. They've got all this sort of lead up to it. And then they're doing it. So it kind of goes straight to the main part of the plot.
Yeah, it's great fun.
Yeah.
It's a really fast-paced, fun little sci-fi film, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, oh God, we got to fire the rocket in 17 hours or the government going to shut us down. We got to do it now.
And a guy gets ill.
Yeah, a guy
has to be
has
replaced.
appendicitis, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And then the guy who replaces him is my favourite in this film.
Oh, yeah. So it's another good... what's his name? Joe Sweeney?
Yep, Joe Sweeney. And the leader of industry, we probably should have said, is Jim Barnes.
Jim Barnes. I was really struggling with all the character names.
Yeah, I think you do forget them as the film goes on. Joe Sweeney's like the main one, which you remember.
Joe Sweeney's the memorable one.
They call him Sweeney all the time as well, don't they?
So he's not an idiot because he's working on... He's a skilled engineer. He's working on building the ship, but he doesn't believe in any of the kind of pie in the sky. He thinks it's going to fail. He doesn't think it's even going to launch. And he's there to be... It's very much like the Woody Woodpecker stuff, isn't it? He's your everyman who he's going to ask the dumb questions about how weightlessness works and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's our way in as the audience.
Yeah.
Finding out about all these things, because we're not science guys. We don't understand this. So we're going to go along this journey the same way Sweeney does.
Yeah.
And Sweeney's got some great lines as well in this film.
Hit me with some of them.
One of the things I remember he talks about when he says, "Oh, it's so crazy. I don't want to look like a dummy. I mean, I saw you put water in the fuel tanks. That's ridiculous. It's not going to fire." And he's just... all of the stuff he does is hilarious.
That was really useful, that comment about the water, because they don't go into a huge amount of detail on how the nuclear engine works. But I think it makes sense. You would need water to react with the nuclear materials, wouldn't you? And that's going to cause the nuclear reaction. Yeah. Oh, is that to cool it down?
I'm not sure.
I don't know how nuclear science works.
Well, you need water, from what I can gather.
Yeah. So you're dropping in those little bits of it. I thought it was so convincing, the description of a nuclear engine. I think after I watched this film, if you'd told me that we did use nuclear engines to get to the moon, I would have completely believed you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it makes sense. And obviously in that era where, like nuclear war.
It's 5 years after America dropped atom bombs on Japan.
Yeah.
So culturally, I'm sure people would be very eager to see nuclear energy being used for something positive in American culture, right?
Yeah, it's not just a instrument for destruction. We can use this in a productive way, even though it's very dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why it's not what we use in the Apollo missions.
I think Joe he's that character that he's just the wise guy the whole time. He's like, this isn't going to work. Oh, you're just having a laugh. And he's just taking the piss out of it the whole time until he actually finds himself on the mission going into space. And he doesn't know what to expect as well. This is the other thing. They make a point of saying it's such a quick turnaround. They don't train any of these astronauts. Poor Sweeney's going up there. He has no idea what to expect. He thinks it's all a big prank. He thinks they're not going to go anywhere.
He only agrees to it on the grounds that he's convinced it won't launch, and he also trusts them that it won't explode either.
Yeah.
So those are his two conditions. It won't launch or explode. Fine, I'll sit in the cockpit.
It's like, I'll sacrifice this date I was supposed to go on. It's all good.
I got to say a dame. So they launch, and he's right in the thick of it with all the G forces and stuff, which
Yeah.
I thought was one of the. It's quite a subtle thing compared to some of the other special effects they have, but it was really good because I had no idea how they were doing it. Do you know the bit I mean? They're all lying in the beds, and their faces kind of start to melt with the G forces.
Yeah, it looked amazing, didn't it?
Yeah.
For like a film for the 1950s, you're just like, how have they done that?
Well, at first I was like, are they just making a face? And I was like, no, like
Their
I can't
face is
make
properly
that face.
pulled back, isn't it?
Well, that's exactly how they did it. And you said there was like a puppeteer guy working on, producing it.
Yeah.
It's a very like puppeteer skill that it was basically they, flesh coloured putty on the cheeks.
Yeah.
That was covering like a little thread, which is essentially glued by the putty to the cheeks. And then underneath the bed, someone's just pulling down on the thread.
Oh my God.
So it's literally just stretching their face back.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's very effective and it looks really good.
Yeah, it does.
Also, what really stood out for me during that, so that's happening to their faces, the noise of the launch it's not just a roaring rocket, it's like a screaming, squealing kind of noise, right? It really like gets in your head. It's like, this is upsetting almost to watch. It's like quite a visceral noise.
And it feels like it goes on for ages, that scene as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, like credit to all of the actors in that scene. They're really sort of like, they look like they're in pain from that G-force.
Yeah, they're really selling it. Which is great because it takes it very seriously. Like Frau in Monde, it works for the same reason Frau in Monde works. Anything cheesy that we see as a modern audience is quite nicely outweighed by the fact that the film just takes it all very seriously and is making a serious effort at this depiction.
And they're building up that filmic language to tell us how space travel works.
Yeah.
So now when you watch a film, you expect them to feel that G-force when they're going up in a rocket. You know why that is because they're getting the sort of the pressure from going that fast so quickly.
Yeah, it's a huge part of any space travel film, isn't it? And we've already seen that kind of built up in Frau in Monde, didn't we? That kind of set that tone of the war against pressure, I think they called it, didn't they?
And then they go into the there's no gravity in space moment as well.
Yeah, we've got another great special effects sequence with the weightlessness. Joe's freaking out. He doesn't know what to do. But they all kind of adjust to it quite quickly, don't they?
Yeah, and they get space sick, don't they?
Yeah.
Because they make a point of saying, oh, you're not seasick, you're space sick.
Yeah.
And they've got pills to help with this space sickness.
Yeah.
And then Sweeney's given one, but he can't swallow it because obviously there's no gravity. So he's really confused at how to swallow in space.
Yeah, very specific, isn't it? Very
Yeah.
specific, interesting detail.
But they're going through all these sort of like, what would happen with this and what would happen with that? And you're building up this idea of what space travel could be like.
Yeah.
And I mean, even before they went into space, they had like models which you saw. There were diagrams and stuff in that businessman scene. There's all this kind of like big scientific knowledge as to how it could potentially happen at this point.
So then we move on to another major set piece of the film, and it's another part of building this filmic language of what we know to be the space travel movie, and it's the EVA. Is that what they're called?
Yep.
A spacewalk, basically. They have to go on the outside of the ship. I think they're just going out there for like a routine inspection, right? Nothing's gone wrong at this
I
point.
think something had gone wrong.
Oh, had it?
Hasn't Sweeney greased the radar or something?
Oh, yeah. He's put some grease on something which should be totally normal, but in the vacuum of space, that's going to freeze.
Yeah, so they send them out. The general who's come along says, oh, you boys go out, you go and have your fun. Go and have your little spacewalk. I'm going to stay indoors.
Yeah.
And then it all goes wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, because the scientist says, I'm just going to go and stick my head in the engine.
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to get a little view of this.
I mean, what did you think was going to happen? I thought he was going to get his head blasted off.
Yeah. I knew something bad was going to happen. You knew it was coming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's sort of worse in a way than getting your head blasted off by the engine, isn't it? He just floats off. It's the big fear of any astronaut movie, isn't it?
Yeah.
You get decoupled, you lose your safety line, and you float off into infinity.
And this is probably the first time you've really seen that in this kind of film anyway.
Yeah.
They might have done it in sort of like your more fantastical sci-fi films beforehand, but this feels like a real fear that could happen. But yeah, all these bits when they're walking around, and we should talk about the spacesuits as well. This is like the first time you properly see them, isn't it?
You see the spacesuits, but they've been introduced earlier. I thought they were a really well done concept because they have a grey spacesuit, I think, when they're preparing for the mission, and then someone shows up behind and says, "No, let's use this. I've got color coordinated, bright colors. Everyone's got a different color." It was so brief, but it was like, oh, that's like really clever. Like that is what you would want. They were bright colors so that we can see each other on the, on a grey, dusty moon.
Yeah.
And you've all got a different color, so no one can get lost. You can tell who's who from 100 yards away.
Yeah.
Really clever.
Exactly. And you see that in 2001 as well, don't you? They've got coloured spacesuits in that. So that's something which is like carried on from this film.
Yeah. That's never, that's not mentioned in 2001. Why is it? And I assumed it was just a bit of a stylistic thing because it looks amazing. But yeah, I wonder if that is, the logic is the same. It's like, I know you're Dave because you've got a red spacesuit on. That's Dave's red spacesuit.
Yeah, and it's like a logic which I never would have thought about as well. And I mean, it also looks good to an audience, like all these different coloured spacesuits.
Definitely.
A bit like Space Power Rangers.
But I like it when that kind of stylistic choice has a really grounded, diegetic reason for existing.
Yeah.
It really, it bulks the whole film. It enriches everything a little bit more. So there's some great special effects. He's in his, I think it's the green or the blue guy, right?
So Sweeney's in green/turquoise. Charles, the scientist, is in blue. Jim, the sort of skipper's in orange. And then you've got the general who's in a yellow suit.
Right.
So
who goes
bright
floating
colours.
off? Sorry.
So it's Charles, the scientist guy, the one who's sort of like done all the planning beforehand. He's the one who goes floating off into space.
Unbelievable. The scientist should have known better.
Yeah, exactly. He's too curious.
It's a horrifying scene, though, isn't it? Because he doesn't get blasted off of anything. He just gently loses his footing, and then he's very, very slowly floating away from the ship.
Yeah.
But they're all very aware that, like, every second he's getting a little bit further away and they're going to lose him, and there's just like complete panic. It was so
And they
good.
do like lots of things with the perspective and stuff to make it look like sometimes it goes a little bit off.
Yeah, it looks like he's not very far away, and then
He's
like,
really far.
Yeah, we see an over the shoulder shot and
Yeah.
he's really far away.
And like the special effects must have been really good for the time, but I couldn't help thinking about Button Moon. Have you seen Button Moon?
No, I never watched it, but I've seen enough to, I think I get what you mean.
Yeah, it's
They're
like
kind of bobbing up and down on the like.
that's it, and
At
the models and
foreground.
everything. And there's the bit. So when they actually do save Charles, they throw a rope or something, don't they?
Yeah.
And the rope's like all dangling, and it's really animated when
Yeah.
when he's grabbing it.
Yeah.
And it was all these little bits which just kept making me think of Button Moon. So
Oh no, I liked it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't properly watch Button Moon. I vaguely.
I was a big fan.
So it didn't. That scene I thought was really good. Yeah, it's not. It's like I said before. The special effects don't hold up over
Yeah.
time, but the conviction of the way they put it together and the seriousness of the scene just kind of sell the whole thing to me.
Jim! No! Help! I'm adrift! I can't get back!
Sweeney, knocked off the ship. Where? Off the stern. Come on.
Jim! Jim! Joe, help! Can you hear me, Jim? I'm adrift!
Coming, Doc.
So he saves him with like an oxygen tank. Wally saves him, doesn't he?
Yeah, they do the Wall-E thing, don't
Yeah.
they? And we only understand that because of the Woody Woodpecker video.
Yeah.
Where they've got the shotgun. And that's how we know that this extinguisher's going to project him further and then he's able to get back.
Yeah. Apparently they wanted to. The original script was that it was a shotgun. They had a shotgun on board, and he used a shotgun. And apparently the reason they didn't like go with that is because it didn't seem right that they would be traveling to the moon with a shotgun.
Yeah.
But that's besides the point, because like if you did fire a shotgun to propel yourself in space, like there's no nuance to that. You can't just pop over to the professor with a shotgun blast. You would be gone like Woody was.
Yeah, exactly.
And we've seen that. We've seen what happened to Woody.
And also, having a gun around a spaceship is probably not sensible.
Yeah, unnecessary and dangerous.
You're just going to cause some sort of damage. We saw what happened in Frau Mond when the ship got shot then.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Guns don't mix with oxygen tanks. Just take the oxygen tank. That'll save the day.
Be careful, people. But anyway, they save him and then they get on the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also another thing which I quite enjoyed was the idea of this camera. So they've got cameras outside of the spaceship.
Okay.
So like when I'm thinking more back to the liftoff scene. They've got a ground control camera.
Oh yeah.
So they can see themselves lifting off, and it's this because they've always got cameras on spaceships, don't they? So they can kind of see what's going on outside.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
so-
you mean in real life now?
Yeah, in real life. So it's kind of like they're sort of also setting this precedent up that you need some way of looking out at the ship other than just a window as well. So like a camera could do it
Yeah.
a bit better.
And that's quite uncommon for 1950, I think.
Yeah.
And it kind of ties it in with the kind of rocket science stuff that was going on at the time, because that's how closed circuit television was invented. There was no one was using camera and television technology to just show an image to like one person until rocket tests by the Nazis. They
wow, that's amazing.
yeah, they obviously wanted to view the rocket launch, but from a safe distance. They
Yeah.
couldn't be out there in case it went wrong, but also if it goes right, it's still really dangerous. So yeah, they got like a German broadcast whiz, a guy that was working in that field, and he developed what would become CCTV
That's amazing.
for that exact purpose. So again, yeah, we're seeing like the same lineage of rocket technology in the war being used in these fictional depictions. So yeah, like a CCTV camera to relay back to the cabin comes off the back of that same sort of world of science.
Yeah. So when they actually get to the moon, did the moon look how you would imagine the moon to look?
The moon's a little bit overly stylized, I thought. It's still a bit Fraude Mondi. There's some mountains and stuff. I know there are mountains on the moon, but again, it comes from that sort of sci-fi magazine painter type artist. It's
Yeah.
got that feel to it. It's very, I don't know how to describe it. Over the top is not a fair way of describing it because it looks good.
Yeah, it's kind of like like I said, it's stylized, it's embellished, isn't it?
Yeah.
They made it look more like a riverbed after the rivers or the water's all gone. So there's cracks in the surface. It's not this kind of like dust that you get from the moon as like now.
Yeah.
Like moon dust and all this kind of stuff. It's like cracked surface. It's blue as well. It's kind of sort of got a blue tint to it rather than the like white of the moon, which you see in films following this.
Yeah.
So it's all this kind of like stylized way of doing it. The guy who did all the backdrops was criticized for this, and like he replied like, "I know this is not how it was supposed to look, but this is what the studio wanted to make it
Okay.
more impressive
Okay, that's
to
interesting.
audiences."
I did wonder like how well we would know what the moon's surface looked like in 1950. We talked about how the last two films that we watched, the older films, they didn't have access to all of this information. But even in 1950, we know so much about rocket science. We know roughly how we're going to get to the moon. But the fact that we haven't been there, it's pre-Sputnik, so there's no probes going to the moon and taking photos. The best we've got is whatever the strongest telescope was in 1950. Which presumably, a lot stronger than the strongest telescope in 29
Yep.
and 1903. But still, we're building up that image of what the moon really looks like. So this artist knew, you're saying,
Yeah.
a bit more about what it would look like.
Yeah, definitely. Because obviously he's got such an interest in that.
Right.
I mean, that's like it's his profession to make, and he's responsible for a lot of like the visualizations of what space travel and what space looks like. Apparently,
Really?
Yeah.
What, like the cultural
I think so.
touchstones for it? That's cool. That makes sense. It looks like every generic description of space for like most of the last century, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So they get to the moon and they have a bit of a rough landing because they overshoot the mark and there's some, tension and worry there, but it really built up afterwards, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's really like coincidentally foreshadowing what happened in Apollo 11's mission, because they overshot. Like Armstrong realized they'd overshot their intended landing site by about 4 miles.
Wow.
So that they were heading for a field of boulders surrounding
God.
like a giant rocky crater.
What do they do?
They managed to get out there and find a good landing spot, but they were very close to sort of like landing in a terrible
Oh,
spot. And I think they only had like 30 seconds or something left to do it. There was a definite time limit which could have gone terribly wrong.
As in the lander would have then just crashed.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, or they would have had to have like aborted somehow, I imagine.
So in Apollo 11, that's weirdly prescient. But Apollo 11's problem was that they would potentially crash immediately if they messed it up. What happens in Destination Moon is it's the same fuel that they're going to need to get off the moon and go home. And by overshooting it, that's kind of the tension for the rest of the film, is that they might not be able to launch off the moon and get home.
Yeah, because they don't have enough fuel to get back, do they?
Yeah.
So they have to try and drop some weight in order to make sure they can get back into the Earth's gravitational pull on the way back. Yeah, so when on the moon, they have a lovely time. They get a telescope, which I thought was a missile launcher at one point, just because of all this talk about missiles.
Well, I can't remember which character it is. I think it's the general. It's like the first thing he says when he gets on the moon is, "I claim this moon for the USA, for the enjoyment or betterment of all people," or something like that.
Yeah, but he's
like,
specifically claiming it as part of America.
Yeah.
So it's like, we rule the moon now.
Yeah.
We're in charge.
Yeah, we're the boys with the moon missiles. So yeah, they got to strip all the weight down. They're back in contact with Earth at this point. The government who hated them on the way out is now like, "Oh, okay, you've done it. Well done."
They're really happy about this mission now.
Yeah. And it becomes very. We'll get into it later, but it becomes very Apollo 13-y, doesn't it? There's constant back and forth with ground control, and they're taking all the suggestions about how they can strip the weight off the rocket and all of that.
Yeah. And they're saying, is it 110 pounds they need to lose?
About that, yeah.
Yeah, they keep saying like the different numbers, and they're like, you're still off. What can you get rid of? Don't make us say it, but you might have to leave someone behind.
Yeah, and Joe steps up.
Yeah. At first, Joe's kind of like, no, not me. And then he's kind of like, okay, they're all like scientists and generals and stuff, and they're arguing amongst themselves. They do almost do the Frau Mond thing of like drawing straws.
Yeah.
And they're going to do it with buttons, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like pick a button. But then whilst they're arguing about that, Joe goes off and starts sort of putting more stuff out. And he says, "Oh, that's fine. Just tell the dames about me when you go back, about my sacrifice."
Yeah. But that kind of motivates them, I think. They kind of all come together as a team. They're like, "Oh, we can't leave Joe. We love him now. He's our mate."
Yeah, good old Joe, the wise guy.
Yeah, so they do devise like an incredibly complicated scheme where... so one of the problems was they wanted to get rid of all of the spacesuits, but one person has to wear a spacesuit to get rid of the other three, so they still have to keep at least one spacesuit. They devised this whole plan where they're going to like drill a hole in the airlock and then blow the remaining spacesuit out of it after Joe's safely back on board, along with some other stuff as well. I think the radio goes out with it.
Yeah, they'd like start taking away the desk. They've got all of the cushions from the seats away. They've chucked that out. And it's like they've just left a load of like rubbish on the moon. It's like mounds of all this space stuff.
Again, prescient. That's basically what we've done to the moon. It's covered in a load of junk that we left there when we landed. But it all works, right? Happy ending. And what's the end title? There's an amazing end title.
This is the end of the beginning.
Yeah.
So it's like, here we are, the space race has started. This film is going to propel that forward.
It's a perfectly American movie for 1950.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good time to talk about Apollo 13 because that is another perfectly American movie for its time, right?
Definitely.
All right.
We're going to the moon. This is the crew of the Apollo 13, wishing everyone back on Earth a pleasant evening. Houston, we have a problem.
We got a wicked shimmy up here.
Houston, we are venting something out into space. It's definitely a gas of some sort.
Flight, the heart rates are skyrocketing.
The Apollo 13 spacecraft is apparently losing breathing oxygen. The emergency has ruled out any chance of a lunar landing.
Why are so many people here?
Something broke on your daddy's spaceship.
So Apollo 13. So this one came out quite a few years after Destination Moon. So it was 1995, wasn't it?
Yeah, 1995. Just an insane year for Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
This is, he's got Apollo 13 out. He's got Toy Story out. He's just had Forrest Gump out.
Yep.
He is absolutely, this is Tom Hanks megastar years.
It's his time to shine.
It really is. He was like the biggest star in the world at this point, wasn't
definitely.
Tom Cruise was not quite. No, Tom Cruise was huge because this is post 80s Tom Cruise, but still, Tom Cruise is kind of the heartthrob guy. Tom Hanks was and is just the nice guy of Hollywood, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I watched there's this thing on YouTube where there's this big conference, and Tom Hanks is there. Jim Lovell is there as well, who the real life astronaut who flew on Apollo 13. In that, Tom Hanks says a little bit about the role, and he talks about how he really pushed to be in this film.
Okay.
Because he has a big interest in space. And he says in the sort of interview, he already knew all the crews from all the different space missions and stuff, because he followed them when he was a kid. He was in high school when the actual Apollo 13 mission happened. He was about 13. And so he already had an interest in this story. He mentions about actors as well, and he says there's always 4 big roles that every actor wants to play. So one of those he'd already done. He'd already been a baseball player in a league of their own.
Right.
He said the other 4 are a cowboy. Everyone wants to be a cowboy.
Oh yeah.
And everyone wants to be an army man as well. And he said the last one was everyone wants to be an astronaut. So when he got the chance to be in this film, he was like, finally, I can be an astronaut. And he went all out to get into this role. He went through training with NASA. All of the other cast members did as well. They did a lot of preparation in order to get this film looking and sounding as realistic as possible.
So this is a film that is all about the detail of space travel, right?
Yeah, definitely. And with those details as well, it's amazing that it's a true story.
Yeah, well, I think that's where you might get into the embellishing of it.
Yeah, it's obviously it has to be viewed as a mainstream film. So I can imagine there are certain bits which are embellished. And obviously Ron Howard has made it more dramatic in the way he's told it on screen. And I'm sure we'll go into that in a minute. But the fact is, it's science fact. It's not science fiction in this case.
Yeah. Well, the fiction here is the emotional story of it. No, that's not fair. I'm sure it's an incredibly emotional, real life story. But that's the narrative, right? There's a lot of science fact, and I would say, as far as I'm aware, it's indisputably it's like the true story of what happened, and very very little of the sciencey bits are embellished for the story. It's more the kind of like the tensions between the characters and the relationships between the characters. Like I wonder if. So Gary Sinise's character gets taken off, and that, I know that really happened because he was exposed to
measles.
Yeah. I wonder if he really came back, because I don't think he's the real guy who came up with the sequencing, the electronic sequencing. That was a flight control engineer, which makes me think, did he come back at all? Is he involved in the real life story beyond the point where he was taken off the mission?
It's interesting, yeah, because the film was based off the book which Jim Lovell had written before the film came out.
That's a non-fiction book though, isn't it? That's like his memoir accounting of it.
But it's interesting as well because that book, the film rights were bought after one chapter was sold to a publisher, and then the publisher took that chapter and then they gave it to the different film companies, and then Ron Howard got hold of it and was like, right, we want to buy the rights to this film once you finish the book. And this was before the book was even finished.
I can totally believe that, because Apollo 13 would be enough of a famous story that like, oh, one of the guys who was up there is in the process of writing a book.
Yeah, we've got to have it.
Let's get the rights for that. But at the same time, in terms of how the story flows, Ron Howard could become aware of that fact. It really wouldn't matter what the rest of the book is. Once he's got the rights, he knows the basic narrative of what happens to that craft. And then he's like, well, I can come up with some good ideas about what people are going to be feeling and how my preferred actors would be responding and stuff like that.
Getting into these characters' mindsets and that kind of thing.
And you don't actually need Jim Lovell to finish that book at that point. From a directing point of view, you're like, well, I can look up the facts of the story. I just need the rights.
Because there's lots of sort of added drama in the film as well. So the fact it's Apollo 13 and there's this big sense of foreboding that Ron Howard creates throughout the film. So
it treads a really fine line, doesn't it, between foreboding and tension building, and it's like winks to the audience, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
How were you feeling about that when that was happening?
I mean, I enjoyed all those bits because it plays well as a film, and they're little sort of story beats that kind of like clue you in, and it's kind of like this was all like meant to happen. So it's like, what happened? So they say like, oh, it's Apollo 13. He's superstitious. They say it's going to be on the 13th day or the 13th.
I think it's going to enter the moon's orbit on the 13th day. And it's all that stuff. And someone pulls up to him in a car like, hey, lucky 13.
Yeah.
His wife's really paranoid about it. She's having nightmares about it.
Yeah, his car stops when those people come up.
Oh, yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
And then, his wife's having nightmares. She loses her wedding ring on the launch, after the launch.
I found that really tense, to be honest.
Yeah.
When her wedding ring goes down the drain, I was like, that's sad.
But because there's lots of moments where things are going wrong, but they're all sort of like, they're not that bad yet.
Yeah. And they followed up with, shortly after launch, one of the 5 engines just goes completely offline. And they just deal with it, and they say it's okay, it's isolated, 4 engines is enough. We power a bit more power off those 4, and we'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Mission continues, and Tom Hanks is hovering over a big twisty knob that says abort. And then just after that, he says, "Oh, I guess we had our glitch for this mission, guys." And they're all sort of like a bit more relaxed.
It's fine.
I mean, that this sort of stuff bothers me where. I generally speaking, I just don't like it in a film where we all know what's about to happen, and then we spend ages waiting for the thing that we know is going to happen, and sort of building up to it, and like, it would be crazy if something went wrong on Apollo 13, right? But it's like, first of all, it's a true story. We know something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Secondly, it's one of the biggest movies of 1995. It's promoted to hell and back, and you know it's going to be when you're making it. So just... I should say I really liked it. I really like this film, but it's 2.5 hours long. Fucking get to the shit going wrong.
I thought it was quite...
in the first 20 minutes.
I thought I needed all that extra stuff beforehand to really know the characters and know what they're like.
Okay.
Like, and again, the sort of like exposition way that they do it as well. Like, there's a really nice moment where Tom Hanks is talking to his son about Apollo 1.
Yeah. It's very, it's much like Woody Woodpecker.
Yeah.
The sun is there because someone needs to be explained how rockets go to the moon, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then what could go wrong? And he sort of says, okay, so basically what happened, son, is the door didn't work.
It's horrifying.
Yeah. And then he says, because of that, this, and this.
Yeah.
And him explaining that, they get a call back later on when the stuff starts going wrong on the ship. And then the first thing the son says is the door working? Was the door working properly? So they've got all of this, but they're also setting up these other characters, and they're really introducing you to why they're going to the moon, why they want to, what are these like astronauts like.
Yeah, and how's that presented then? How does Ron Howard, and also I guess Jim Lovell as the author of this story, how do they present the moon? What does the moon mean to them?
It starts with everybody watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin sort of like going to the moon. So this has just happened. Somebody's been on the moon now. So someone's beat them to the post. These astronauts all wanted to do it. And Jim Lovell as well had already been on, 3 different space missions beforehand?
I don't know how many, but he was on Apollo 8, which was the first manned trip all the way around the moon. So he flew all the way around the moon. He saw the moon. He was one of the first 3 people to ever, see the dark side of the moon, all of that. But
he didn't see gold though.
No gold. But yeah, they just came back. That was the whole point of the mission, So the entire Apollo program was building up to landing on the moon, but it was in stages and stuff. And the 8th mission was, just circumnavigate, whatever.
And once they'd landed on the moon, everybody was kind of lost interest. Nobody, there's a big thing in the whole film about people not caring about people being on the moon now. They don't they've seen it. They can't get a broadcasting deal. Nobody wants to show their footage of them sort of like in space, which is really quite heartbreaking to watch.
Yeah, it is quite heartbreaking, especially because Tom Hanks has sold the idea of the moon so well as Jim Lovell. We're fully bought into the idea that Jim Lovell, he's not got over it. He got so close to it. He wants to be an explorer. He wants to push things to the next level. There's that little bit of jealousy. It's like camaraderie with Armstrong and Aldrin, but also a little bit of jealousy there, like you said.
Yeah.
But he's never given up on that idea. He's certainly not lost interest. So yeah, when they're broadcasting and no one on TV wants to show it, that's really sad because we know what it means, especially to Lovell.
Yeah, and they're sort of like they're having such a good time. They finally made it into space, and they know they're going to be on the moon soon, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, and there's a really nice moment where they, when Fred, he's played by Bill Paxton, he plays the music. And what music do they play? It's like Spirit in the Sky.
Yeah, Spirit in the Sky.
And then Tom Hanks says, "Oh, it was supposed to be 2001
because the lander or the one of the parts of their ship is called the Odyssey."
Yeah, and again, from sort of like a filmic standpoint, all these elements sort of add to it as looking through we're looking through sci-fi films. It all adds to that sort of like mythology about what actually happened and how it translated into real life.
Yeah, yeah.
So like the other characters are really good as well because they're all depicted as sort of like family men, really, except for Kevin Bacon's character.
Yeah, so Kevin Bacon's the one that gets brought in to replace Gary Sinai.
He plays Jack Swigert.
Yeah.
So Jack is a guy, he's a bachelor, and he's quite a ladies' man. The first time you see him, he's like he's got a
looking forward to how you describe it.
I have to be really careful here. So he's got a Budweiser bottle and a glass, and he's simulating a docking sequence.
Yeah.
And there's lots of innuendo in there.
Yeah.
And he's saying it's he says like it's really nice when it goes in to this woman. And yeah, he's a bit sleazy, he's a bit of a womanizer.
I would be pissed off if I was the real Jack Swigert watching this film. That's a bit of fun at the start.
Yeah.
That he's kind of the laddie one. But that kind of laddie perception of Jack Swigert just builds up and builds up.
Yeah.
Not a very favourable way to the real guy, right?
It's like, oh, he's the wild card. He's the one. If something goes wrong, it'll be because of him, and they've had to get him on last minute.
Yeah. He's brought in late. They do the training. He messes up the training. He's not as good as Gary Sinai's.
Yeah.
Or, well, he's also not had as much training. Gary Sinai's... Actually, he made a mistake at the start of the film, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And he insists on trying
It's
again.
like a slight one. They still did it, but he's like, no, I want to go back and make sure I can do this 100%.
That's the overshot that's comparable, isn't it? Because he gets the overshot wrong and then he's coming out, he's like, I've got to do it again because I used too much fuel and blah, blah, blah.
Whereas Kevin Bacon's character, the first time, when he gets the call to say he's on the mission, he's in the shower with a woman.
Yeah.
So they're like really contrasting this family man and this bachelor guy.
And he also, so Bill Paxton gets really ill on the mission, and the explanation for that is what Bill Paxton gives. And I don't think it's ever really I don't know if that was an assumption or a joke or whatever, but he says he's got the clap off of Jack because they shared a piss tube or something like that, right?
I don't think it could be that.
Do you think he was joking because he wasn't playing?
I think
like
he
a
was
gag?
joking.
Right. He is joking. I'm being stupid, aren't I? It's a gag.
There were so many great lines in this one as well, like comparable to old Joe Sweeney.
Yeah.
Like,
what you got?
Oh god, let me run through some of these great lines. So Tom Hanks at one point says it's like flying with a dead elephant on our back.
Yeah, that's good.
There's another one which Bill Paxton says. He says, I could eat the arse out of a dead rhinoceros. Absolutely epic line.
Both of those strike me as real quotes, especially eating the ass out of a dead rhinoceros. That is so incredibly specific that I can only believe it was an astronaut on death's door saying something incredibly weird and funny at just the right moment.
Exactly.
You can't write that, right? It's too good and too specific.
I mean, it's a great line, isn't it?
More serious lines, absolutely iconic. Ed Harris, failure is not an option.
Yeah.
That was like the tagline for the movie.
That's a really good line. It's written really well. All of the dialogue, like whether it's based on what they actually said or not, it's just well crafted. It's a well crafted script.
Yeah, really well crafted script. Well directed. Special effects are amazing. I think it still looks very good. It hasn't aged like some, big 95 blockbusters would.
Yeah. And it's like even lines that other characters get. So when the wives of the astronauts are approached, they say, just say you're excited,
thrilled,
proud, and thrilled.
Yeah.
And she literally says those three words.
Well, I'm excited, proud, and thrilled.
Yeah. It's like that kind of thing. It's just like, oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
Can we just have a word with you?
Remember, you're proud, happy, and thrilled.
How are you feeling?
We're very proud and very happy when we're thrilled.
It's James Horner doing the score as well. It's a very good soundtrack to this.
It's really good, yeah.
It really just revs up the emotion of the scenes. It does it's not a subtle soundtrack, but it brings a lot of it to life. And again, it's where, for me, the film does tread a bit of a line between just really extremely amazing heightened emotions and maybe just tipping over into being a bit mawkish, By the end of the film, I had tears in my eyes. I was totally into it. So I guess for me, it didn't quite tip over that line, but I don't know. I wonder if for some people it would.
It's dramatic. Everything is dramatic. This is like a docudrama. Everything's just accentuated. So like when they do when they're walking up to the spaceship at the start, when they're heading for the rocket, there's this really patriotic music and that kind of thing, and it's all just it's all really powerful and it's there to stir emotion.
Yeah, that soundtrack really wells up under the scene we were just talking about where he's explaining Apollo 1, and again it was that moment of like the story there is that some of his colleagues and friends died in a fire under circumstances that he is willingly about to put himself in as well, and he's trying to explain that to his kid without upsetting him too much.
Yeah, but he's still trying to be frank with him as well, isn't he?
Yeah, and then all the music's like swelling up, and it's a great performance. It's quite a subtle bit of acting from Tom Hanks. He doesn't really go for it. But you can see that there's like a lot of pain there that he doesn't want to show his son.
Yeah,
it's great.
So the way they sort of depict the actual mission itself, they do lots. So they've already set up what's going on the ground, and then when you get introduced to the people in flight control, so Ed Harris's character, Gene,
Gantz,
so he's the guy who's sort of like keeping the ship together. He's the one who's controlling everything from down at the bottom. You see him get like a waistcoat from his wife, like a lucky waistcoat which has been made especially for this mission.
Yeah, I don't think you see Ed Harris's face until he puts on the waistcoat.
Yeah.
Because there's like a tracking shot where he's saying, oh, great, it's here, finally, I was worried it wouldn't arrive. And then you see the waistcoat first and he puts it on, but his head's not in shot until he's like, tugging on the lapels and he's all settled in. I think everyone gives him a round of applause.
Yeah, he means business, don't you?
And that superstition element as well is really important for everything that's going on in this film. It adds that little bit of a layer. I assume again that's a real life idiosyncrasy of Gantz.
Yeah, flight control is really important because every time there's a problem, they cut to the problem solvers, which are on the ground.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and this is like this is one of like, well, since we started the series, this is the first time we've seen. It's the first time we've seen what's going on the ground, as well as what's going on in space.
Yeah, it's making a thing out of the behind the scenes people.
Yeah, because in the other ones we only see them traveling to space, and then in these older films we've looked at, they don't even show them getting back home.
Yeah,
the fun bit's getting to space, and then that's it. Whereas this is a film about getting home again.
So I think that's really interesting. I wonder if that's. Do you think that telling a story about going to the moon after the fact presents challenges to the storytelling, or do you think there's advantages there? Because you're right, there isn't a great deal of interest in the story of coming back to Earth. This is a film that is entirely about that. It sets it up for emotional reasons as the characters, they want to go to the moon. But that's not what this story is about. This is a story about getting people home.
Yeah.
Do you think that because we're after the fact now, we're 25-ish years after the moon landings, there's a whole different way to approach the story?
Yeah, and it's what so many space films do so well is they're looking at the human characters and the human effect of making this journey. And in this film, it is about the people on the ground as much as it is the people on the mission. So it's the effects that doing this kind of thing has on the family. You see Tom Hanks's wife in this, and she's just like, she's nervous the whole time, and she's like been through this. Jim Lovell's wife had been through this before, and she's having to see her husband do it again. And at the same time, nobody cares. The press aren't over this. They're sort of not looking into any of it until this catastrophe happens.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there's all eyes on like Apollo 13, and are these astronauts going to get back? Are they going to make it? And then people sort of rally behind them, and there's big support from everyone.
Yeah. It does become that more human drama, doesn't it? And I think that it's much easier to do that because it's so much later, because the interest in how we get to the moon is maybe a little bit less, and the value of human life in a narrative goes up then, right? Because it is less about, let's get to the moon and claim it for the USA at all costs. It's about, something's gone wrong and 3 men with families might die. We all have to do everything we can to save them.
And it's also this sort of this pain you feel from Tom Hanks when he's playing Jim Lovell, because he really wanted to get to the moon. He can see it. And there's a bit when he has like a little sort of daydream of what it would have actually been like, and sort of like touching like the moon's surface.
Yeah.
And you really feel for him because they are so close.
Yeah.
Yet they're having to sort of watch it go by. And there's no way they can do it at this point because of what's gone wrong on the ship.
There's an amazing moment immediately after that little daydream where Fred, what is his name? He goes by Fredo, doesn't he?
Tom Hanks always calls him Fredo.
Yeah, where he says something like, "Oh, it's so close. I would have loved to, take the lander down." And Lovell says, "What are your intentions, guys? Because I want to get home." And it's like he's had that. It's just a moment of being very pragmatic, and like I think that's him getting over not going to the moon, right? In that moment, he's had his little daydream. We know how much it means to him, but he's not an idiot. He knows what the options are. He needs to get serious about making sure they get home safe.
Yeah, because this is also just after, so they've looked out the window and they say, oh, look, it's Mount Marilyn. Mount Marilyn, which is the mountain named after his wife, which he named previously on one of his other missions. So he's seen that and he sort of like had the dream, and now he's thinking, actually, I want to get back to the real Marilyn.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen this mountain before.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get on the moon. I need to go home now.
Yeah.
And how the hell are we going to do that when we're stranded in space, basically?
Yeah.
Look, it's Frau Morrow. I can see our landing site.
Wow. Look at that Tsiolkovsky crater. I can't believe how bright the ejecta blanket is.
It's like snow. It's beautiful. It's Marienbrim to the north.
So to get back to the heroes on the ground kind of subplot of this movie, not even a subplot, it's the plot, right?
Yeah.
That does lead to. So one of my favorite bits in the whole film was where they have to replace a CO2 filter. So like everything's gone wrong, stuff keeps going wrong, and then they've got plenty of oxygen, but the filters to get rid of the carbon dioxide in the air are broken. So even though they've got enough oxygen, they're still going to suffocate because they can't get rid of the CO2. And then just to make matters worse, they've even got spare filters on board, but it's for a different bit of the ship.
Yeah.
And it's the wrong shape. So they've had a few scenes. I really like the scenes where they're trying to figure stuff out on Earth, and they are giving themselves all of the tools that the astronauts have, literally all of the materials that they have, and say, we've got to figure this out. And yeah, they're trying to get, what is it? It's like they literally have to get a square peg in a round hole. Is that the...
Yeah, that's what they keep
thing
saying,
that they're
don't
asked
they?
to do? But they make it work. It's amazing. And they've, you see kind of, you don't see quite the detail of exactly how they do it, but you understand what they've done. They've just like boxed up the filter and put a pipe on it, and that's what they're going to have to do.
Yeah, they're just troubleshooting the whole time.
Yeah.
And we haven't even said the most epic line of the film either.
What? Do you not think it's failure is not an option?
Houston, we've got a problem.
Oh, yeah. It's
Houston,
good.
Yeah, that's a brilliant line. Come on, Houston, we have a problem. That's
Yeah.
to like, oh, that's amazing.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we have a problem.
I mean, I was floored when Ed Harris said failure is not an option.
I mean, that's a good line.
Because they ask him what the options are, and he's like, I got all my men working on this. Failure is not an option.
We never lost an American in space. We're sure as hell not going to lose one on my watch. Failure is not an option.
Still, which one are people going to remember?
Failure is not an option was written on the poster.
Yeah, but then everyone says, oh, Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah, okay. All right. I'll fight you for it.
Okay.
The solution to that filter situation, one of the guys turns to the engineer and goes, you're a steely-eyed missile man.
Yeah.
I love that line. That was really good. But it kind of, I got really distracted then because I was like, how do I know that line? We're going to hear that line again later in this series. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I
don't. I'm not going to say it if you don't know.
No, don't say it. I'm going to look forward to hearing it.
We're going to get to that in a few episodes'
Okay,
time.
so say the quote again so I've got it in my head.
You, sir, are a steely-eyed missile man.
Okay, I'm going to look out for that in the series. So the other sort of big problem that happens, which is sort of like towards the end of their journey, so they've worked out that they have to slingshot around the moon, go around the moon's orbit in order to sort of like get back. But then when they're almost there, they have a power problem, don't they? So they can't go over 20 amps.
Again, it's very similar to the CO2 filter. It's the minutiae of stuff going wrong and the detail of space travel. And this is something that Frau Monde and Destination Moon didn't do and couldn't do because we didn't know enough about space travel. And the designs of the rockets in those films are so sleek. You know, they look more like a missile. Whereas Apollo 13 knows that space travel is insanely detailed and complicated. So the stuff that goes wrong can be interesting in delving into how detailed those problems are.
Yeah, because they need to have so in this particular scenario, they need to have a certain amount of things working on the landing vessel in order to get back safely and control their sort of landing. I don't know the specifics, as you can clearly tell.
I think the big thing is the computer that works out like trajectories.
Yeah, they
and
need
stuff.
to have the computer working, and the computer takes a certain amount of amps to run. But in order to get back, they've had to turn off all of their systems. So they're freezing in this spaceship. You can see it in the actors. They're having a terrible time. But they need to save this power so they can have enough to get back.
Yeah.
And so, but they can't go over this 20 amps, but they need all of these different things on at that time in order to get home safely. So they work through all these different scenarios, don't they?
Yeah. But again, this is they kind of bring the human narrative bit into it, which is where I'm not sure if this is real. I should probably look it up. But this is why Gary Sinise comes back into the plot, because they need someone who knows exactly what it's like to be on the ship, and they need to run these simulations of powering up the computer basically in all these different combinations without going over 20 amps. And he's saying, like, just give me whatever they've got on the ship. Have you got a flashlight? And they hand him a flashlight. He's like, no, they don't have that on the ship. Get me the flashlight they've got on the ship.
Exactly. He says, I won't sleep because they're not going to sleep either.
Yeah.
So I can't sleep.
Yeah,
So I
make
need
it
to keep
cold.
just doing
If they're
it.
cold, make it cold.
Yeah.
All of that, yeah. But it's got that nice kind of human drama because he was annoyed about the situation, but he's able to come back and save his friends and still be part of this mission.
Yeah, because previously you've seen it. There's a scene where he's in his lounge at home drinking some Budweiser all over this film, and he's watching a chat show. And they're talking about Kevin Bacon's character and how like there's this bachelor in space, and like they're making a big thing about him.
Yeah, and then he kind of storms out of the room, doesn't he? And then he misses the news broadcast saying
the
everything's
special
gone wrong.
report just pops up.
Yeah, because I was actually a little bit confused when he came back into it because I didn't realise that he'd left the room, and I thought that he'd just like not done anything about it, and he knew that there was a problem, but he doesn't find out until later. 'Cause
Yeah.
he's a good guy. Everyone's a good guy in this. So they run all these scenarios for getting the amps, don't they? It's just like a great little logic puzzle that they've got, and you can't solve it because there's literally 22 amps worth of equipment that has to be turned on.
Yeah.
And you can't turn off something at the right time. It just won't work.
And it's even like checking these kind of things as well. There's another scene where Jim, who's played by Tom Hanks, he's trying to do a equation to make sure the gyros are going to do the right thing. And they've got 4 other people on the ground doing the same equation at the same time to try and get that answer and double check it.
Yeah.
So everything has to be so precise.
Is that the same scene where they tell him to watch the gyro? And he's like, I don't want to watch the goddamn I'm watching the goddamn gyro.
Yeah, and I'd like that as well. They're getting so pissed off with everything because they're doing their best. There's the bit when they take off their medical reading
yeah,
things.
the surgeon just flips out.
Yeah, he's like, oh, I've lost one. I've lost another one.
He's dead.
It's like, no, they're just pissed off with the world seeing how their heart rate is.
Yeah, I felt bad for the surgeon character there because they all rip off their bio things, and I think it's Krantz, whatever his name is. Ed Harris is like, just give him a little bit of leeway. But like, everyone's working flat out, and the surgeon role is literally 100% to monitor the vitals and, respond to that. So if you're telling me to give a little bit of leeway that they've all ripped off my only connection to them, well, I'm not doing anything here then, am I?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I felt a little bit bad for him, but
poor guy.
I'm sure he had a job to do when they got home. So all of these little things where they're delving into the minutiae, I thought were very good little ways of building extra bits of tension. The tension is so high. We know what the stakes are, even though we probably know the outcome, but having those little extra bits going wrong, and they're so complicated, so fiddly, it works really well to build extra tension because it's so frustrating that they've got enough oxygen but too much CO2, so we've got to go through all of this, and all we want to do is switch the computer on. It was always meant to be switched on, but we can't do it because we haven't got enough power to land you all of this. It's little added bits. Were they sucking you in with the tension that it's building up?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's like we said before, it's just one thing after another for these poor guys.
Yeah.
Something goes wrong every 5 seconds after that first initial launch. They get up there, everything's fine for a little bit, sort of like a false victory moment. We're going to make it to space. We're in space. We're having a lovely time. And then the second thing goes wrong, and then the third thing, and the fourth thing, and it just keeps ramping up. There's always more problems, and you see them argue as well. They're arguing with each other because the tension is too much. They all say like, "Oh, they're not telling us that we're going to die. This is all going to fail," and yet they sort of like break themselves out of that sort of cycle. And it's all of this, it's just building up tension until that moment when they get back to Earth.
Well, just before they get back to Earth, though, what were you feeling in that? There's a scene where they go communication blackout because they're coming through Earth's atmosphere, and it's supposed to be 3 minutes of radio silence, and we get up to 4.5 minutes.
It's so well done, but the build up to that as well is really clever as well because so you've got there's the scene where Kathleen Quinlan, who's playing Marilyn Lovell, Jim Lovell's wife, she's watching a news report, and it's an old interview of Jim talking about one of his previous missions. And again, you've got this kind of like luck and finding your way home thing. And this bit of interview footage, if it's an actual bit of interview footage that was played, that's just, it ties in too much. It's just ridiculous to be true.
Again, like, maybe that's a true story about Jim Lovell, but I don't totally believe that she watched the interview footage the night it was happening and all that. But it works very well, and it's really important for Jim's character, isn't it? That he's a cooler heads will prevail type guy, right?
Yeah.
He is the guy. He's had the daydream, and then he says, "Gents, what are your intentions? I want to get home." That's he always gets his head back on a level and sorts things out, doesn't he?
Yeah.
What you were talking about, those arguments, the argument scenes are great. He's the one who they are in the heat of an argument, and Houston messages them, and he yells out, "Are we still on? Are mics still on?" They're like, "No," and then he goes, "Houston, how's it going down there?" Like he goes straight back into like, "I'm taking control of the situation."
because there is that moment before when he's sort of losing his rag with everything.
Yeah, they're all yelling at each other, but he's able to just gather himself back up because he knows what's at stake.
But that interview scene perfectly displays that.
I know I'm running out of fuel, so I'm thinking about ditching in the ocean. And I look down there, and then in the darkness, there's this green trail. It's like a long carpet that's just laid out right beneath me, and it was the algae, right? It was that phosphorescent stuff that gets churned up in the wake of a big ship, and it was just leading me home. And If my cockpit lights hadn't shorted out, there's no way I'd have ever been able to see that. So, you never know what events are going to transpire to get you home.
And there's another bit as well when we see his mum. So Jim Lovell's mum, who seems a bit crazy.
Played by Ron Howard's mum.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Amazing. So she sort of like seems like she's lost it a little bit. And then when the family come and tell her what's going on, she's very calm, and like the little girl's crying, and she says, "Are you scared? Don't worry. Like my son could fly a washing machine if they sent that to the moon, and he'd land it safely."
Yeah.
So it's like little touches like that make you know that this guy Jim is the real deal. And when it comes to moments where there's 3 minutes of blackout, it's like if it goes to 4, they're done. They will have burnt up, and then they make it. It's all of this setup, and you're kind of like, oh, thank God, he is like they've done it.
Yeah.
And it's just a relief because the whole of the rest of the film is just building up tension. You're getting stressed out. Are they going to make it? Are they not? You know they are, but then how the hell were they going to do it?
Yeah. They perfectly wrap that moment up as well, because you're absolutely right. It's a crescendo of all of the emotion of the film. And then they land, and you know they're safe, but from a like film storytelling point of view, you haven't quite had all the catharsis of it. And he just finally ends it with another call to Houston, and he just says, "This is Apollo 13 signing off."
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And that's the moment where you're like, we're safe, we're home.
That's it.
Jim Lovell, the wonderful man, has saved us all.
He's done it. But it's like all that tension as well was accentuated by what they were talking about and how small that spacecraft is.
Yeah.
So they say it's the size of 2 phone booths, and it's as thin as like a sheet of aluminium.
Yeah, a couple
or
of sheets of foil.
Yeah.
I was shocked by that.
Yeah, absolutely mad. So then when they finally make it, it's like adds that extra bit because you know how fragile their journey was, and they could have burnt up.
I think, and I think they just introduced the idea that there might be a problem with the heat shield as well. Didn't they say that, because they've just broken away from the rest of the ship, and it's the first time they can see the explosion.
Yes, they left the Odyssey. And is it the Aquarius they're in at this point?
I can't remember which one's which, but one of them is called Aquarius.
I think maybe
but they see that, and when they report that back to Earth, all the guys in flight control are furiously, trying to figure out what went wrong. And one of their suggestions is, well, there might be a problem with the heat shield if that happened. So it's like we've got all this way, and then another possible risk is introduced, and we still don't know they're going to make it.
It's like, will the parachute go? We don't have the parachutes.
It might freeze into a block of ice.
Yeah.
Something else went wrong, and
but the parachute as well is like what we saw in A Trip to the Moon with the shell, which we talked about previously. So in A Trip to the Moon, the shell comes down as a parachute.
Oh yeah,
and it goes in. And this is the first we're seeing this in 1995, and it's actually happened.
Yeah.
So that's like a weird filmic thing that's happened in real life.
Yeah, it's great. Just quickly, did you listen to the public service broadcasting album?
No, but talk about it.
So, public service broadcasting, I don't know, I think a lot of our listeners probably already heard of them, but do you know who they are and what their music is?
I know very little about this group.
Their kind of shtick, I guess, is that instead of any vocals, they use, originally it was stuff from public service broadcasting, so it's old like BBC broadcastings or wartime broadcasts. That was their first album, was kind of wartime stuff. It was called Inform, Educate, Entertain. So it was all about early BBC stuff.
Yeah.
The second album's called The Race for Space. So it's just news clips and stuff like that from this era, starting from, so I think the first track is Sputnik, I think. There's a track about Yuri Gagarin. There's a track about Valentina something, who was the first woman cosmonaut.
Oh, wow.
There's a track called The Other Side, which is about Apollo 11. And the Apollo tracks use so when Jim Lovell's talking to Houston in this film, that is all recorded, and I think you can still hear all of that audio. So that's those are the clips they're using in the records. And there's a great track where Apollo 8's going around the back and they lose contact. And then it's not quite silence, it's just like a bit of synth and I think a very low drum beat. And that goes on for like 30 seconds to a minute with the occasional like snippet of ground control saying, 1 minute until contact, and then a newsreader saying, oh, will we reach them again or whatever? And then they come back around and it's amazing. And then it kind of crescendos with like an Apollo 11 track and then a post-Apollo 11 track. It's amazing. Really good album. Do you know the scene in Apollo 13 where it's the launch sequence and Ed Harris is kind of directing all of this surgeon, go, GNC, go, flight, go.
Yeah.
And it's like all of the little stations in flight control have their little have their responsibility, and they say go or don't go. And when they're all cleared, then they can launch. There's a track called Go, which is the Apollo 11, and it uses all of the actual quotes from it's Gantz's voice, so the real Ed Harris, and all of the people who are in ground control.
Mad.
That like makes up the chorus of the track, and it is awesome. I love it. You need to check it out. It's very, very good.
Okay, all flight controllers, gonna go for powered descent. Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go. Ecom, go.
Again, it sort of like shows the impact of this real life event and how it's sort of like it's become a film. It turned into music.
Yeah.
The actual recordings of the broadcasting. It's that, it's got such weight to it, hasn't it?
There's an iconography to the Apollo missions that is incredibly enduring. And Apollo 13 interestingly touches on how it all kind of waned off after Apollo 13. There was 14, I think there was 15, and then I think 16, 17, 18, they just sort of started to can it at that point.
Yeah.
So I think 3-ish more trips went to the moon, and, astronauts did walk on the moon, and he talks about that in the epilogue. But we've already seen the interest is waning. Once they got to the moon, how do you keep the public interested? If the public aren't interested, who's funding the government body that pays for it? It's not going to happen. That iconography, I think, it's still around. It's still in the public consciousness, but the real driving force of public interest in the 70s and 80s, it did wane off, didn't it?
Yeah, which I think sort of like is reflected in the kind of films which came after sort of things like Destination Moon in the 50s and that kind of thing. So it goes again to what other types of thing can we explore in space, especially in film. So that leads us nicely on to our next episode.
Yeah, so what's up next after the moon?
So in our next episode, we'll be going a little bit further afield. So we're going to be looking at a film called Solaris from 1972 by Andrei Tarkovsky. This is quite a heavyweight film as well. It's 2 hours, 47 minutes, and it is weird. So we're going to have some fun watching that. You better book some time in your diary to watch this film next week, Max. It's going to be a weighty one.
I can't wait. I'm excited.
So we're going to be looking at Solaris. What's the other film we're going to be looking at as well?
Europa Report. I don't know anything about it.
Okay, well, it's a mystery sci-fi, so you don't need to know anything about it.
Extra mystery for me.
Yeah, it's all done with found footage as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, at least that's the premise of it.
Nice.
So in that one, they go to the fourth largest moon of Jupiter, which is Europa. So again, we're kind of still on a moon, but we're further afield. So we're going further out into space for the next episode. We'll be looking at the idea of searching for something. So why are they going out to space? What are they going to find? And we're going to sort of look at that idea in the next episode.
And some of those internal themes.
Yeah, because I'm sure that will be coming out in both of those films. What these astronauts are going through, what these people in space are dealing with mentally. And will they be as emotional as Apollo 13? Who knows?
Solaris isn't. Anyway, join us next time for that. That's going to be an interesting episode, I think. I am looking forward to rewatching Solaris. I do like it. It's a good film. So please do give us a review on iTunes or anywhere else you're able to leave a review. Write it on a pub toilet wall. Every little helps, gets the word out there. How can people get in touch with us, James?
So you can find us online on every single social media thing you can think of, except for the ones which Matt always suggests, Bebo and MySpace. We're not on those ones. But we are on Facebook. We've got a Facebook page, so please like the page. We're on Instagram, and we're also on Twitter. So it's at Through Sci-Fi Pod. that's the best way to find us, or just type in Journey Through Sci-Fi. We've also got a website, which is journeythroughscifi.com, so you can find us there. Where, like I said, we're all over the internet. Come and chat to us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear sort of like your points of view, if you've liked any episodes, if there's anything else you want to hear us chat about. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you for listening. See you next time.